My name is Katherine, and at 34, I walked into my grandmother's while reading clutching a worn leather folder that would destroy my parents' perfectly crafted lies. They actually laughed when they saw me, my mother's diamond earrings catching the light as she whispered something cruel to my father. But when I placed that folder on the mahogany table, the lawyer's face drained of color. He knew exactly what those documents meant. 20 years of deception was about to unravel in this very room. Before I continue with what happened that day, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with family betrayal or know someone who has, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of truth prevailing over deception. What you're about to hear isn't just about money or inheritance, it's about how the people who should protect us sometimes become our worst enemies, and how one grandmother's wisdom saved me from a lifetime of manipulation. Growing up in the Hamilton household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy from day one. I learned early that I was the defective model while my younger brother Christopher was the premium edition. Every family gathering became a showcase of this twisted dynamic, with me playing the role of the disappointment while Christopher basked in endless praise and material rewards. The comparison started young and never stopped. When Christopher got accepted into his expensive prep school, my parents threw a celebration dinner at the country club. When I made honor roll at public school, they asked why I wasn't valedictorian. Christopher's participation trophies got display cases while my academic achievement awards got shoved in drawers. By the time we reached college age, the divide had become a canyon. My parents, Robert and Linda Hamilton, had perfected the art of favoritism disguised as tough love. They'd tell relatives I needed to learn independence while Christopher needed support. They'd explain my second-hand clothes as character building while Christopher's designer wardrobe was necessity for his future career. Every family friend heard about Christopher's law school ambitions and my impractical dreams of social work. The only person who saw through this charade was grandmother Dorothy. She'd invite me for lunch every Wednesday at the small cafe downtown, away from my parents' watchful eyes. Over soup and sandwiches, she'd listen to my struggles without judgment, occasionally slipping me grocery money when my parents decided I needed another lesson in self-sufficiency. She never criticized them openly, but her knowing look said everything. The financial disparity became impossible to ignore during college years. Christopher received a brand new BMW for his 18th birthday while I got a lecture about the value of public transportation. His Harvard tuition appeared magically paid while I juggled 3 jobs to afford community college. My parents would say things like Katherine chose her path whenever anyone questioned the obvious inequality. The first major betrayal came when I discovered the truth about my college fund. Grandpa Joe had set aside equal amounts for both grandchildren before he passed. I found out through a cousin's slip that my fund hadn't vanished due to bad investments as my parents claimed. They'd drained it completely to pay for Christopher's law school, justified by telling themselves I wouldn't need much money for my bleeding heart career choice. Working at a 24-hour diner, tutoring high school kids, and cleaning offices became my reality while Christopher complained about the stress of studying in his fully paid Harvard dorm. I'd come home exhausted at 2 a.m. to find evidence of another family dinner I hadn't been invited to, takeout containers from expensive restaurants littering the kitchen. My graduation from community college happened on the same day as one of Christopher's mock trial competitions. Guess which event my parents attended? I walked across that stage with Dorothy as my only family witness, her proud smile worth more than their absence hurt. She took me to dinner afterward and said something I'll never forget: keep every receipt, every document, every proof of who you really are. Someday you'll need it. The breaking point came 5 years later when I got engaged to David. We'd been planning a modest wedding, saving every penny from our social services jobs. When I tentatively asked my parents if they could contribute anything, my mother actually laughed. She explained they needed to keep funds available for when Christopher decided to start his own practice. The boy who'd received hundreds of thousands was still the priority over the daughter asking for a few thousand. That night, Dorothy called me. She'd heard about the conversation from my aunt and was furious. For the first time, she broke her silence about my parents' behavior. She told me she'd been documenting everything for years, keeping records of every slight, every financial manipulation, every lie they'd told about me. She said she was changing her will to reflect who truly deserved her legacy, but warned me to be careful. My parents had shown their true colors, and desperate people do desperate things. 3 months ago, Dorothy died suddenly from what the doctors called a massive stroke. The woman who'd been hiking and gardening just days before was gone in an instant. My parents took control immediately, barring me from the hospital during her final hours by telling staff I was too emotionally unstable to visit. They produced a medical directive I'd never seen before, claiming Dorothy had specifically excluded me from end-of-life decisions. The funeral felt like a performance, with my parents playing the role of devoted son and daughter-in-law while I was pushed to the edges. Christopher gave a eulogy full of lies about their close relationship, failing to mention he'd visited her exactly twice in the past 5 years. I wasn't allowed to speak, my mother claiming they needed to keep the service brief. Strange things started happening immediately after Dorothy's death. Her longtime lawyer, Mr. Peterson, who'd handled her affairs for 30 years, was suddenly replaced by Christopher's law school friend, Jeremy Watts. When I called Peterson's office to ask why, his secretary said he'd been removed from the case for conflict of interest but wouldn't elaborate. The woman sounded scared. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received an anonymous call at work. The voice was disguised but the message was clear: check your grandmother's safety deposit box at First National. The key is where she taught you to hide treasures. My hands shook as I realized they meant the hollow book in Dorothy's library where she'd let me stash candy as a child. That evening, I drove to Dorothy's house, now controlled by my parents who'd changed the locks. I waited until they left for their weekly dinner at the club and climbed through the basement window I'd used as a teenager sneaking home after curfew. The house felt wrong without Dorothy's warmth, but I found the book and the key exactly where she'd left it. The safety deposit box contained a revelation that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showed systematic theft spanning 5 years. Large transfers labeled as medical expenses and home care costs had been flowing directly to Christopher's supposed law firm account. The amounts were staggering, sometimes $50,000 in a single month. Dorothy had been supporting herself on Social Security while my family drained her life savings. Worse than the theft was the stack of legal documents with Dorothy's shaky signature. Powers of attorney, property transfers, investment authorizations, all dated during periods when Dorothy's medical records showed she was heavily medicated for a minor surgery. The signatures looked forced, some barely resembling her usual elegant script. My parents had been vultures circling a woman who'd shown them nothing but kindness. I also found Dorothy's real will in that box, properly witnessed and notarized by Peterson 6 months before her death. It was completely different from whatever document my parents were planning to present. This will left specific instructions and detailed reasons for every bequest. The bulk of her estate was designated for me, with explanations of my parents' financial abuse and Christopher's complicity. My discovery didn't go unnoticed. Within days of visiting the bank, my parents launched their first major attack. They filed paperwork claiming I was suffering from paranoid delusions and grief-induced psychosis. They told family members I'd been harassing them with wild accusations and conspiracy theories. 2 police officers showed up at my work to conduct a wellness check, humiliating me in front of colleagues and clients. David stood by me through their attempts to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. He'd seen their manipulation for years and wasn't swayed by their sudden concern for my mental health. But my parents were convincing actors, and soon extended family members were calling to express worry about my breakdown. Aunts who'd loved me since childhood now crossed streets to avoid me. My cousin Lisa seemed to be the only family member who believed me. She'd call to check on me, asking detailed questions about what I'd discovered. I shared too much with her, grateful for anyone who'd listen. I didn't realize until weeks later that she was reporting every word back to my parents, seduced by promises of money from Dorothy's estate. The 4th attack came through my workplace. An anonymous complaint to state regulators claimed I was unstable and shouldn't be working with vulnerable populations. The investigation disrupted our entire office, requiring statements from coworkers and clients. My supervisor, who'd known me for 7 years, fought to keep me employed but warned that another complaint might succeed. Meanwhile, my parents were moving quickly to solidify their theft. They'd already sold Dorothy's car and were preparing to list her house. When I tried to file an injunction, I discovered they'd been appointed emergency executors based on Christopher's friend's recommendation. The legal system seemed stacked against me at every turn, and I was running out of money to fight back. Late one night, I got another anonymous call. This time it was Dorothy's former nurse, Maria, who'd been fired 2 weeks before Dorothy's death. She wanted to meet but was terrified of my parents. When we finally met at a truck stop outside town, she revealed the truth. Dorothy had been completely lucid until the end, furious about the thefts and planning to expose everything. She'd installed cameras to catch them in the act, but my parents had found most of the equipment. Maria's information gave me hope, but also painted a target on my back. My parents escalated their campaign, filing a restraining order claiming I was stalking and harassing them. They submitted edited text messages and fabricated evidence of threats. Suddenly, I was legally barred from contacting most of my family or coming within 500 feet of my childhood home. Maria's revelation about the hidden cameras changed everything. According to her, Dorothy had been more prepared than anyone realized. She'd hired a private security company to install surveillance throughout her house after catching my mother rifling through her financial documents. Most cameras were discovered and destroyed, but Dorothy had mentioned one backup system even the installers didn't know about. The clue came from Dorothy's favorite saying, "A teddy bear keeps all secrets safe." In her attic sat my childhood teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, which Dorothy had repaired countless times over the years. At 3 a.m, I broke into what was legally still Dorothy's house, my hands trembling as I climbed the stairs I'd known since childhood. Inside Mr. Button's carefully restitched back seam, I found a small hard drive wrapped in plastic. The videos on that drive revealed a systematic campaign of elder abuse that made me physically sick. There was Christopher, the golden child with his Harvard law degree, screaming at Dorothy while she cowered in her chair. My mother ransacking Dorothy's desk, searching for bank information. My father standing over Dorothy as she signed documents, his hand pressing down on hers when she tried to pull away. The worst was Christopher caught on camera saying the old bat won't last much longer anyway while pocketing cash from Dorothy's purse. Each video was timestamped and showed clear criminal behavior. But I needed more than just family cruelty, I needed to prove the financial crimes. That's when I remembered Dorothy's meticulous nature. She'd kept journals since she was 12, never missing a day. Those journals would be her testimony from beyond the grave. Finding the journals required another risk. Dorothy had mentioned keeping them in a safety deposit box at a different bank, one my parents didn't know about. She'd added me as an authorized user years ago, saying every woman needed a secure place for important documents. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, remembered Dorothy fondly and expressed genuine sorrow at her passing. She also mentioned that someone had been calling, trying to access Dorothy's boxes without proper authorization. The journals were a prosecutor's dream. Dorothy had documented every suspicious incident, every forged signature, every threat. She'd noted dates when money disappeared, when documents were presented for signing, when she was given extra medication that made her drowsy. Her final entries were heartbreaking, expressing fear for her life and desperation to protect me from my family's greed. As I built my case, my parents intensified their attacks. The 5th assault on my life came through my home. David and I returned from grocery shopping to find our front door ajar and our house ransacked. The intruders had been surgical, searching specifically for documents and electronics. They'd found nothing because I'd learned from Dorothy to hide things where no one would look. Everything important was in a storage unit rented under David's mother's maiden name. The security cameras I'd installed after the restraining order caught everything. The 2 men who broke in were professionals, but one made the mistake of removing his mask to smoke a cigarette on our porch. Facial recognition would later identify him as a private investigator who'd worked for Christopher's supposed law firm. We had them on breaking and entering, but I needed more to prove the connection to my parents. That connection came from an unexpected source. My former best friend Grace called me crying at midnight. My parents had approached her with an offer of $20,000 to testify that I'd always been unstable and jealous of Christopher. They wanted her to lie about seeing me steal from Dorothy and make threats against the family. Grace had almost taken the money, desperate to pay for her daughter's medical treatments, but couldn't go through with it. She recorded their entire conversation on her phone. Grace's recording revealed something even more shocking. Christopher wasn't even a real lawyer. He'd failed the bar exam 3 times and had been pretending to practice law for 2 years. My parents had been covering for him, creating a fake firm and fabricating his entire career. Dorothy had discovered this deception and threatened to expose them all, which explained the escalation in their theft and abuse. I reached out to Mr. Peterson again, this time with evidence that he might be willing to hear. The elderly lawyer met me at a park, constantly checking over his shoulder. He admitted that Christopher had threatened to destroy his practice if he didn't withdraw from Dorothy's case. But seeing the evidence I'd gathered, especially Dorothy's journals mentioning him as the only lawyer she trusted, moved him to act. He agreed to help me pro bono, saying Dorothy deserved justice and he should have stood up to the threats sooner. Peterson's first action was to contact the bank manager who'd been processing the suspicious transfers. Mr. Rodriguez had been uncomfortable with the transactions but had been told by Christopher that questioning them would result in a discrimination lawsuit. With Peterson's backing, Rodriguez felt safe enough to provide detailed records of every suspicious transaction, including ones where signatures clearly didn't match Dorothy's authentic writing. The 7th attack came at David's workplace. My parents, growing desperate, called his employer claiming David had embezzled funds from previous jobs and was under investigation. They provided forged documents and fake case numbers. David's boss, fortunately, was a former police detective who recognized fabricated evidence. He not only rejected their claims but offered to testify about the harassment if needed. Through Peterson, I learned that Adult Protective Services had actually opened an investigation into Dorothy's situation 6 months before her death. A concerned neighbor had reported seeing bruises on Dorothy's arms and witnessing my mother roughly handling her. The investigation had been mysteriously closed without action, but the original report still existed. The investigator's notes mentioned that Dorothy seemed frightened and kept looking at Christopher before answering questions. Medical records Peterson subpoenaed revealed a pattern of suspicious injuries over Dorothy's final years. Falls that happened when only my parents were present. Bruises and patterns consistent with grabbing. Over-medication that coincided with major financial transactions. One doctor had noted concerns but hadn't pursued them after receiving a threatening letter from Christopher's fake law firm. As I compiled evidence, I discovered the scope of my parents' crimes extended beyond Dorothy. Peterson found similar patterns with my father's mother, who'd died 15 years earlier under mysterious circumstances after changing her will to favor my parents. They'd been perfecting their elderly abuse scheme for decades, viewing family members as nothing more than future paydays. With Peterson's guidance, I began building a legal strategy that would expose not just the theft but the entire criminal enterprise my family had been running. We needed to act carefully, as my parents still had significant resources and connections. Peterson suggested we file our case strategically, timing it to prevent them from hiding assets or destroying additional evidence. The first step was securing Dorothy's real will with the probate court. Peterson knew the clerk and filed it personally, ensuring it couldn't be lost or misfiled. We also submitted the video testimony Dorothy had recorded, where she clearly stated her intentions and explained why she was disinheriting my parents and Christopher. Her words were measured and precise, showing no signs of the confusion my parents claimed. Our next move targeted Christopher's fake law practice. Peterson filed complaints with the State Bar Association, including evidence that Christopher had been practicing law without a license. The investigation revealed he'd been taking money from elderly clients for services he couldn't legally provide. Several victims came forward, describing how Christopher had prepared wills and trusts that were completely invalid. My parents responded with their eighth attack, trying to destroy our financial stability. They contacted David's employer again, this time with photos doctored to show David with other women, claiming he was having affairs with clients. They sent similar photos to me at work, hoping to destroy our marriage from within. But David and I had been through too much together. We recognized the photos as poorly edited fakes and added them to our evidence file. The ninth assault was more personal. My parents reached out to every friend, coworker, and acquaintance they could find, spreading rumors that I was drug-addicted and violent. They created fake social media profiles to post manufactured evidence of my supposed crimes. My children came home from school crying because classmates were repeating lies they'd heard from their parents. The social damage was devastating but only strengthened my resolve. Peterson introduced me to a forensic accountant named Dr. Sarah Walsh who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her analysis of Dorothy's financial records was damning. She identified over $2 million in stolen funds, traced through a complex web of accounts Christopher had set up. The money had funded my parents' lavish lifestyle, Christopher's fake law firm, and even a secret beach house purchased under a shell company. We also hired a private investigator to conduct surveillance on my family. Within a week, he documented my parents' moving assets, destroying documents, and meeting with known criminals. He photographed them at a storage facility, loading boxes that likely contained evidence. His background check on Christopher revealed arrests for fraud in 2 other states, charges that had been mysteriously dropped after witnesses recanted. Our evidence package grew to include over 300 pages of documentation, 40 hours of video, and testimony from dozens of witnesses. Dorothy's friends from her gardening club came forward with stories of how my parents had isolated her in her final years. Her hairdresser revealed that Dorothy had confided fears about her safety. Even the mailman noticed that Dorothy seemed frightened when my parents were around. Peterson arranged a meeting with the district attorney's office. ADA Jennifer Martinez specialized in elder abuse cases and had been following similar patterns across the state. She reviewed our evidence and immediately opened a criminal investigation. She warned us that my parents would likely escalate once they realized criminal charges were coming, and she was right. The 10th attack was their most vicious yet. They hired someone to call Child Protective Services, claiming David and I were abusing our children. The investigation was traumatic for our family, but the social workers quickly recognized it as a malicious false report. My parents had overplayed their hand, making false reports to CPS was a crime that added to their growing list of charges. Meanwhile, I discovered more victims of my parents' schemes. 3 elderly aunts and uncles had experienced similar financial abuse, though on smaller scales. Each had been too embarrassed or frightened to report it. I spent weeks convincing them to come forward, promising Dorothy's foundation would support them through the legal process. Their testimony would prove a pattern of behavior spanning decades. Christopher began to crack under pressure. His fake law firm collapsed when clients discovered he wasn't licensed. He called me drunk one night, oscillating between threats and pleas for mercy. He admitted our parents had forced him into the scheme but claimed he was a victim too. I recorded every word, knowing his confession would be crucial evidence. He revealed details about other crimes, including tax fraud and money laundering. As the will-reading date approached, Peterson made sure everyone involved understood the stakes. The lawyer my parents had hired, Jeremy Watts, was also under investigation for his role in the fraud. He'd been promised a partnership in Christopher's fake firm and had prepared fraudulent documents. Peterson warned him that continuing the charade would result in disbarment and criminal charges. The morning of the will reading arrived with unusual April warmth. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress Dorothy had complimented once, while my hands trembled around the leather folder containing evidence that would destroy my family's carefully constructed lies. David squeezed my hand as we walked into the imposing downtown law firm, its marble lobby designed to intimidate. We were ready. My parents arrived like royalty making an entrance. My mother wore a new designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her diamonds catching the morning light streaming through tall windows. My father looked smugly confident in his Italian shoes and gold watch, gifts he'd bought with Dorothy's stolen money. Christopher strutted beside them in an expensive suit, still playing the successful lawyer despite his crumbling facade. The conference room filled with extended family, all positioned like chess pieces in my parents' game. Aunts and uncles who'd believed their lies sat stiffly, shooting disapproving glances my way. Cousins whispered behind manicured hands about my mental breakdown and jealous delusions. My parents had done their work well, poisoning every relationship I'd once cherished. Only David's presence kept me grounded as we took seats at the far end of the polished table. The lawyer, Mr. Watts, began with theatrical gravity, clearly enjoying his moment of importance. He produced a will dated just 2 months before Dorothy's death, during a period I knew she'd been heavily medicated. As he began reading provisions that left everything to Christopher, with my parents as trustees, my mother actually smiled at me. It was the same cruel smile she'd worn when telling 8-year-old me that Santa only brought presents to good children like Christopher. The will Watts read was insulting in its transparency. It claimed Dorothy found me unstable and unfit to handle financial matters and praised Christopher's brilliant legal mind and financial acumen. The forged document even included a provision preventing me from contesting the will, citing my history of mental illness that existed only in my parents' fabrications. Several family members nodded along, fully believing this revisionist history. When Watts finished his performance, he asked if anyone had any objections. The room held its breath, waiting for me to explode in the emotional outburst my parents had primed them to expect. Instead, I stood calmly and walked to the head of the table. My mother laughed, actually laughed, whispering loudly to my aunt about my pathetic attempt to cause drama. That laugh died when I placed the leather folder on the table. Watts opened it dismissively, clearly expecting nothing of substance. The color drained from his face as he recognized Mr. Peterson's letterhead and Dorothy's authentic signature. His hand shook as he found the video testimony, the forensic accounting report, and the criminal investigation summary. He looked between the documents and my parents, realizing he'd been caught participating in a massive fraud. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the conference room screen. Before Mr. Watts continues, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I think everyone should hear what Dorothy really wanted to say. The room erupted in protests from my parents, with my father demanding security remove me. But Watts, now understanding his legal exposure, waved them off and played the video. Dorothy appeared on screen, sitting in her favorite garden chair, looking directly at the camera with clear, determined eyes. My name is Dorothy Elizabeth Hamilton, she began, and I am recording this on June 15th of this year, being of sound mind and body, to ensure my final wishes are heard despite the efforts of those who would steal from me. The room fell silent as Dorothy detailed the systematic theft, showing bank statements on camera. She explained how Robert and Linda had drugged her to sign documents, how Christopher had threatened her when she refused to cooperate, how they'd isolated her from friends who might have helped. She spoke about finding me crying in her garden after my parents had stolen my college fund, and how that moment broke her heart forever. I leave the bulk of my estate to my granddaughter Katherine, Dorothy continued, not out of favoritism, but out of justice. She is the only family member who never asked me for money, who never saw me as a bank account to plunder. While others stole, she brought me groceries with her last $20. While others schemed, she simply loved me. Christopher jumped up, shouting that the video was fake, that I'd used technology to create a deep fake. His desperation was palpable as he demanded the video be tested for authenticity. Sit down, Dorothy's voice commanded from the screen, as if she'd anticipated this moment. Christopher, you're not even a real lawyer. Yes, I know about your failed bar exams, your fake practice, your elderly clients who trusted you with their life savings. The revelations continued as Dorothy played audio recordings of my parents planning their thefts. The room heard my mother saying Dorothy deserved to lose everything for playing favorites and my father calculating how much they could steal without triggering bank alerts. Christopher's voice came through clearly, just keep her drugged until she signs. The old bat won't last much longer anyway. Family members began shifting uncomfortably, recognizing voices and remembering suspicious incidents they dismissed. My Aunt Martha gasped when Dorothy mentioned catching Linda rifling through her jewelry box during Thanksgiving. Uncle James nodded as Dorothy described how Robert had tried to get him to invest in Christopher's fake law firm. The narrative my parents had constructed was crumbling in real time. Peterson entered the room as Dorothy's video ended, accompanied by 2 police officers and ADA Martinez. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, Christopher Hamilton, Martinez announced, "You're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft exceeding $2 million. The room exploded in chaos as my parents protested their innocence while Christopher broke down completely. "This is all Katherine's fault," Christopher screamed as officers handcuffed him. "She manipulated Grandma. She's the one who should be arrested." But his accusations fell flat as Peterson produced the forensic evidence, including Christopher's own fingerprints on forged documents and video evidence of him physically threatening Dorothy. The golden child's mask had finally slipped, revealing the criminal beneath. My mother maintained her composure until Peterson revealed they'd also uncovered evidence about my paternal grandmother's death. Then she crumbled, realizing their decades-old crime had finally caught up with them. She looked at me with pure hatred, spitting out, "You've destroyed this family." I responded quietly, "No, Mother. You destroyed it the moment you chose greed over love." As police led them away, relatives who'd shunned me began approaching with apologies and shock. Cousin Lisa tried to hug me, crying about being deceived. I stepped away from her embrace, saying simply, "You chose to believe lies that justified cruelty. That's on you." The family members who'd participated in my isolation would have to live with their choices. Dorothy's inheritance couldn't buy back their integrity. Watts, realizing his career was over, tried to claim he'd been deceived too. But Peterson had evidence of Watts preparing documents he knew were fraudulent, including emails discussing how to make the forgeries more believable. He'd be facing his own criminal charges and certain disbarment. The prestigious law firm immediately distanced themselves, claiming Watts had acted without their knowledge. The corrected will reading proceeded with Peterson officiating. Dorothy had indeed left me the bulk of her estate, the house, her investments, and a significant cash inheritance. But she'd also included specific bequests for family members who'd shown her kindness, deliberately excluding those who'd participated in or enabled the abuse. Each bequest came with a personal note explaining Dorothy's reasoning, her words carrying weight from beyond the grave. The aftermath of the will reading sent shockwaves through our extended family and community. News of the arrest spread quickly, with local media picking up the story of the elaborate elder abuse scheme. "Prominent family arrested in $2 million elder theft" read the headlines, accompanied by photos of my parents and Christopher being led away in handcuffs. The Golden family's reputation lay in ruins. Christopher's breakdown in custody led to a full confession. Facing decades in prison and abandoned by our parents who immediately blamed everything on him, he decided to cooperate with prosecutors. His revelation painted a picture of criminal activity spanning 20 years. My parents hadn't just stolen from Dorothy and my paternal grandmother. They'd systematically targeted elderly relatives, viewing family gatherings as scouting opportunities for their next victim. The investigation uncovered 3 additional victims within our extended family. Great Aunt Ruth had lost her retirement savings to mysterious medical expenses. Uncle George's valuable art collection had been sold without his knowledge while he recovered from surgery. Cousin Eleanor's lake house had been transferred to one of Christopher's shell companies through forged documents. Each victim had been too embarrassed or confused to report the thefts, believing the family's explanations of financial necessity. More disturbing was the revelation that my parents had done this before marrying into our family. My mother, it turned out, had a previous identity and a history of elder abuse charges in another state. She'd changed her name and created a new persona, targeting my father as her next mark. But instead of victimizing him, she'd found a willing partner in crime. Together, they'd built a fortune on the suffering of those who trusted them. Local news investigators dug deeper, interviewing Dorothy's friends and neighbors. Their stories painted a heartbreaking picture of her final years. The vibrant woman who'd hosted garden parties became a prisoner in her own home. Neighbors reported seeing her at windows, looking out longingly while my parents' cars blocked her driveway. Her gardening club friends described how she'd suddenly stopped attending meetings, with my parents claiming she was too ill despite seeing her working in her garden. The forensic accountant's final report revealed the full scope of the theft. Beyond the $2 million stolen directly, my parents had manipulated investments, causing losses of another $1 million. They'd taken out loans against Dorothy's house, sold her valuable antiques, and even cashed in her life insurance policies early. The beach house they'd purchased was just one of several properties bought with stolen funds. Their entire lifestyle had been built on theft from the woman who'd welcomed them into her family. As news spread, more victims came forward from outside our family. Christopher's fake law practice had defrauded dozens of elderly clients across 3 counties. He prepared wills and trusts that were legally worthless, charging thousands for documents any online template could have provided better. Some clients had died believing their affairs were in order, leaving families to discover the cruel truth. The State Bar Association launched a victims fund to compensate those he'd defrauded. The trial preparations revealed my parents' contingency plans. They'd hidden assets in offshore accounts and cryptocurrency, believing they could flee if discovered. They'd even researched countries without extradition treaties. But their arrogance had made them sloppy. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit traced every hidden dollar, freezing accounts and seizing assets. The beach house, the luxury cars, the jewelry, everything purchased with stolen money was confiscated. Extended family members struggled with the revelations. Those who participated in shunning me faced their own guilt. Aunt Martha called weekly, crying about how she'd believed Linda's lies about my mental health. Uncle James sent long letters apologizing for not questioning why Dorothy had suddenly stopped attending family functions. Their guilt was genuine, but the damage to our relationships was permanent. Trust, once shattered, doesn't easily rebuild. Some family members, however, revealed they'd had suspicions all along. Cousin Robert admitted he'd questioned the sudden wealth but had been threatened by Christopher to stay quiet. Great Aunt Helen confessed she'd seen Linda going through Dorothy's mail but had been too frightened to intervene. Their silence had enabled the abuse, a fact that would haunt them forever. Dorothy's video testimony calling out specific family members for their complicity left no room for claiming ignorance. The criminal trial became a sensation, with court TV covering the proceedings. My parents, who'd spent decades cultivating a respectable image, saw their crimes dissected on national television. Neighbors testified about their suspicions. Bank employees described feeling pressured to process questionable transactions. Dorothy's doctor admitted he'd been threatened when he questioned her injuries. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Christopher testified against our parents in exchange for a reduced sentence. On the stand, he revealed the full extent of their psychological manipulation. They'd trained him from childhood to see elderly relatives as resources to exploit. He'd been rewarded for lying, praised for manipulation, and punished for showing empathy. While this didn't excuse his crimes, it revealed how my parents had corrupted their own son into a weapon against his family. My mother's past finally caught up with her during the trial. Prosecutors had uncovered her previous identity and brought forward victims from 25 years ago. Elderly people she'd defrauded as a young woman testified via video link, describing schemes identical to what she'd done to Dorothy. The judge allowed this pattern evidence, destroying any chance of her claiming this was an isolated incident. She'd been a predator her entire adult life. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. My parents received 15 years each for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Christopher got 10 years but would serve only 5 with good behavior and continued cooperation. The judge called their crimes a betrayal of the most sacred trust and noted that they'd shown no remorse, only regret at being caught. Even during sentencing, my mother glared at me with undimmed hatred. In the months following the trial, I struggled with complex emotions that no amount of justice could fully resolve. The family I'd grown up in was effectively destroyed, revealed as a criminal enterprise built on exploitation and lies. Extended family relationships lay in ruins, with some relatives genuinely remorseful while others resented me for exposing the truth. Dorothy's house, now mine, felt both like a sanctuary and a museum of painful memories. Therapy became essential for processing the trauma. Dr. Patricia Reeves specialized in family betrayal and helped me understand that my parents' treatment wasn't about my worth but their pathology. She explained how they'd deliberately undermined my self-esteem to maintain control, how they'd used Christopher as both weapon and victim. Understanding the psychology behind their abuse didn't excuse it but helped me stop blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. David proved himself a true partner through every challenge. While other relationships crumbled under the pressure, ours grew stronger. He never questioned my pursuit of justice, never suggested I should forgive and forget for family harmony. When nightmares woke me, he held me while I processed memories of childhood moments now tainted by understanding my parents' true nature. His family embraced me fully, showing me what healthy family relationships actually looked like. Our children learned difficult but valuable lessons through this ordeal. They saw firsthand how evil can wear familiar faces and how standing up for truth sometimes means standing alone. We were honest with them about why they no longer saw their grandparents, using age-appropriate explanations about how some people choose greed over love. They witnessed the importance of protecting vulnerable people and the courage required to confront wrongdoing, even when the perpetrators are family. I established the Dorothy Foundation using my inheritance, creating a resource for elder abuse victims that Dorothy would have been proud of. We funded legal services for families who couldn't afford to fight predatory relatives. We created educational programs teaching seniors how to protect themselves from financial exploitation. We lobbied for stronger elder abuse laws and mandatory reporting requirements. Within the first year, we helped dozens of families recover stolen assets and find justice. The foundation also supported research into family-based elder abuse, a crime often hidden by shame and family loyalty. We published Dorothy's story, with her journals forming the basis of educational materials about recognizing abuse signs. Her meticulous documentation became a template for others facing similar situations. Law schools began using our case in their elder law curricula, ensuring future lawyers would understand these complex family dynamics. Speaking engagements followed as our story gained national attention. I stood before audiences of social workers, law enforcement, and families, sharing the warning signs I'd missed and the evidence-gathering techniques that ultimately brought justice. Every speech began with Dorothy's photo, reminding people that behind every statistic was a beloved family member who deserved protection. The speeches were emotionally draining but necessary for preventing future victims. Some family relationships slowly rebuilt on new foundations. Cousin Robert, who'd suspected the truth but stayed silent, became one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers. He channeled his guilt into action, helping other families navigate the legal system. Aunt Martha donated her time as a victim advocate, using her own experience of being deceived to help others recognize manipulation. Not all wounds healed, but some family members genuinely learned and grew from the experience. I wrote a book about recognizing and preventing elder abuse within families, titled When Blood Betrays, A Granddaughter's Fight for Justice. It detailed not just our story but provided practical resources for families facing similar situations. The book tour brought me into contact with hundreds of victims who'd suffered in silence, believing they were alone. Their stories reinforced that my parents weren't unique. Predators who exploit family trust exist in every community. The foundation expanded to include safe housing for seniors escaping abusive family situations. Dorothy House, our first facility, provided temporary shelter while legal proceedings protected victims' assets. We staffed it with social workers trained in family abuse dynamics and lawyers who understood the urgency of securing protective orders. Seeing elderly people find safety and dignity after exploitation became the most rewarding part of my work. My parents' appeals failed, their sentences upheld by every court. They sent letters alternating between manipulation and threats, which I forwarded unopened to law enforcement. Christopher, surprisingly, began genuine rehabilitation in prison. He wrote once, not asking for forgiveness but acknowledging the harm he'd caused. He volunteered to speak to other inmates about elder abuse, trying to break the cycle he'd been trapped in. Whether his transformation was real remained to be seen. The beach house and other assets purchased with stolen funds were liquidated, with proceeds distributed among all victims. Some elderly relatives recovered enough to maintain their independence. Others had lost too much to fully rebuild but found comfort knowing justice had been served. The foundation ensured no victim faced legal bills. Dorothy's stolen wealth ironically funded justice for other elderly victims. 5 years later, I stood in Dorothy's garden, now meticulously maintained in her honor. The Dorothy Foundation had helped thousands of families and changed state laws protecting elderly citizens. My children grew up understanding that family isn't defined by blood but by love and protection. David and I had built a life based on trust and honesty, the opposite of what I'd known growing up. The trauma hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into purpose. Looking at Dorothy's photograph on my desk, I often thought about her final gift. Yes, the inheritance provided resources to fight injustice and help others. But her greatest gift was showing me that truth and courage matter more than family harmony built on lies. She knew the cost of exposing my parents' crimes, the family relationships that would shatter, the pain I'd endure. But she also knew that living with integrity was worth any price. Sometimes people ask if I forgive my parents. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing continued abuse. I've forgiven them in the sense that I don't let hatred poison my life. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation with people who've shown no remorse, who would hurt me again given the chance. Protecting myself and others from predators isn't unforgiving, it's wisdom Dorothy paid dearly to teach me. The family that shares your blood can indeed be your worst enemy, as I learned too well. But the family you choose, the family that chooses you back, that's where real love lives. David, our children, the foundation staff who've become like siblings, the survivors who've shared their stories, Dorothy's memory guiding every decision, that's my true family. We're bound not by genetics but by shared values of protection, justice, and love that doesn't come with a price tag. When I think about that day in the lawyer's office, watching my parents laugh at me, I remember the moment everything changed. Not when they were arrested or when the will was read, but when I chose to place that folder on the table despite my shaking hands. That was the moment I chose truth over family secrets, justice over false peace, Dorothy's legacy over my parents' lies. And in that choice, I finally became the woman Dorothy always knew I could be, someone who stands up to evil, even when it wears your mother's face and speaks in your father's voice. The money gave me resources, but Dorothy's faith in me gave me strength to stand when everyone wanted me to fall. And that strength, passed from a grandmother to a granddaughter through Wednesday lunches and garden conversations, through hidden documents and secret recordings, that's the inheritance that truly mattered. It's the inheritance I now pass on to every elderly person we protect, every family we help find justice, every predator we stop from stealing one more dollar or one more moment of peace from those who deserve to live their final years with dignity and love. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've experienced family betrayal or know someone struggling with elder abuse, please share this video to let them know they're not alone. What would you do if you discovered your family was harming vulnerable relatives? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you or could help someone you know, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth triumphing over deception. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that standing up to family abuse is not betrayal, it's love in its purest form. Remember, protecting the vulnerable is everyone's responsibility, even when the predators share your last name.